If you have ever wondered about parenting strategies, kids, emotions, feelings, how we can help our children become more emotionally intelligent, right? And help with their emotional development so they can become adults who can make and keep friendships and handle conflict, then you're in the right place because today we are talking with Dr. Eileen Kennedy-Moore, who is an expert on the subject, and she's going to be sharing with us all kinds of great information on how we can help raise well-adjusted children in this crazy world. So, Dr. Eileen Kennedy-Moore is a PhD, and she's also known as Dr. Friendtastic. She is an author, psychologist, and mom of four based out of Princeton, New Jersey. She is the creator of the Kids Ask Dr. Friendtastic podcast, where she answers questions from children about making and keeping friends. Her blog, Growing Friendships on Psychology Today, has over 4.9 million views, and Dr. Kennedy Moore has been featured on many major outlets in the news, as well as Live with Kelly and Ryan and the New York Times. You can learn more about her work, obviously, on her website, eileenkennedymore.com. And we are about to jump in and meet Kelly, so let's go. Welcome, Dr. Kennedy Moore. How are you today?
Hello, Patrick. I am so delighted to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for making time. Really excited to learn more about the wonderful work you're doing. I know you're a busy, busy lady between being a practicing psychologist, working with, I'm sure, adults and children. You've also published many and co-authored many books around the subjects of feelings and children and doing relationships. And that's tough stuff, you know. As a therapist, I talk about being working with adults. You know, we're all just big kids. I remember when I used to
Yes.
work with just children, I was like, oh, when I was going to work with adults just out of college, I was like, I don't know, I've never worked with adults. And now just we're all just big kids. We're all still trying to figure it out, right?
That's very true. That's very true.
So I'm excited to jump in. But before we do so, why don't you go ahead and let our audience know a little bit more about your background and what got you into this incredible work?
Sure. So, at a personal level, I grew up and moved around a lot as a kid. And I think I learned to make friends at a very early age because I had to. There was new situations, new cultures. We lived in Lima, Peru, and Madrid, Spain, and various places around Chicago. And in my practice, I see so many kids that their main concern is about making and keeping friends,
Mhm.
especially after the pandemic. That really shook a lot of kids. And for many children, that was years of isolation. So they're getting back together, they're figuring it all out. And it's not like we figured this all out at age 9 and then we're done, even as
Right.
adults,
If only it
right?
were so easy. Yeah.
Right, in new situations and new relationships, we're constantly learning about getting along. So it's
Hmm.
for me, it is just fascinating work.
Yeah, sounds like it, and it's wonderful work, and I don't think it can be emphasized enough how important this work is because if we don't theoretically learn these lessons early on in life, we have to kind of go back and learn them later or relearn them if we learn them in a skewed fashion, right?
Yeah, and I think that is fundamentally one of our main jobs as parents is to
Mm-hmm.
teach kids how to be in relationships. And that it's complicated. It's complicated. So we have to not only understand how we're feeling, but be able to communicate it and cope with it. And we also have to be able to imagine someone else's perspective. That's what really fuels the development of children's friendships, from those
Hmm.
love the one you're with friendships of the toddler years to the more intimate and lasting friendships of the teen years, is an increasing ability to understand how somebody else is thinking or feeling or viewing this situation.
And that can't be overstated either because that's a complicated skill, and especially for children who tend to be more dichotomous, right?
Right.
And
Exactly. I'm
learning how
right,
to
you're wrong.
exactly, or you know, if something bad is happening, it must be my fault, or you know, in the home or elsewhere, or somebody else's fault. It's hard to see the gray, right? It's hard to see the
Exactly.
situation and not internalize it.
Right. And to
Yeah.
know that there are many ways to be true. You know, they can see it their way and I can see it my way. And each of those is true. Each of those is an aspect of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how did you get into the work of children specifically? Did you always know you wanted to specialize with this population?
So in my practice, I see both adults and kids,
Hmm.
and I like the variety of that. Um, Adults, of course, can understand things at a deeper level,
Hmm.
but kids get better. And that's very gratifying. Development is on our side, and I find that a little bit of intervention early on can make a huge difference down the road as kids move forward in ways that help them build strong relationships and help them to know and understand themselves and cope with whatever is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, your most recent work is Growing Feelings, right?
Yes, yes. So
Yeah.
Chris McLaughlin and I, it was my co-author from this book. And years ago, we wrote a book called Growing Friendships, which is a kid's
Hmm.
guide to making and keeping friends.
Hmm.
And we had so much fun writing that book. But then we were thinking about it and we realized that kids' biggest feelings tend to happen in the context of their relationships. That's where we get excited and also hurt and also angry and also worried. So we really wanted to dive into those tough moments in friendships that we all experience. Now, because this is addressed at kids, we have a lot of cartoons about common friendship dilemmas. And then the narrator comes in and gives lots of research based tips. And then wandering through the text are this cat and dog character who make goofy suggestions like, he should try licking them on the face. It's like, no, he shouldn't. That's not a good idea. But the humor engages kids.
I saw the promo video. I thought that was so cool the way you did that. Yeah, absolutely. Good
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah, you have a lot of good information out there in your YouTube channel for sure. Yeah,
thanks.
good.
Yeah.
So
So this
this project, you said this project was a collaboration with you and Miss McLaughlin, right?
Yeah.
And that
Yes, we
stemmed
have so
out
much
of
fun
your
writing together.
yeah,
Yeah,
it
so
sounds like, because this
we're
isn't your
we're
first
co-authors
work
and also
together,
really
right?
good friends, which makes it fun.
That's great. And so what was the brainchild for this book? Like, why did you guys feel it was necessary to put this out in the world?
I think there is a lot of misinformation about feelings out there.
Hmm.
So one myth, which has absolutely no empirical support whatsoever, is that if you have a big feeling, you have to let it out.
Hmm.
Well, one of my early books was called Expressing Emotion, and it's
Hmm.
called Myths, Realities, and Therapeutic Strategies. And this was for mental health professionals. It has
Hmm.
47 pages of references. There
Oh
is
wow.
not a shred of evidence that just barfing out our feelings does a lick of good. In fact, if
Hmm.
you're just lashing out at everybody around you, that's going to hurt your relationships. So, really, what we need to do is to combine that thinking and feeling, integrate those two things. And when we express, we want to express in a way that other people are going to hear us and respond in the way that we want them to.
Hmm.
So, just in my practice, I often tell kids, I like to draw pictures for kids because I think it gets through to them more than all of our adult talking. So, I draw a picture of somebody just yelling and somebody else going like this. And on the top, I write, the louder we yell, the harder it is for people to hear us. And then I get the
Hmm.
kids to explain to me, so why is that? Why don't they hear you better if you're louder? And the answer, of course, is because they don't want to hear.
Hmm.
So we need to be able to talk about our feelings in a way that's going to get us heard. And that's such an important thing. And again, that's imagining the other person's perspective. That's constantly what we're
Hmm.
looking for. We don't necessarily go along with what the other person wants. Sometimes we need to stand up for what we want, but we need to understand it. We need to be able to imagine that. So
Yeah.
that's one myth that's really important. Um, and there are a lot of things that kids and adults need to understand about emotions. So one thing that's important to understand is that feelings change.
Hmm.
So whatever you're feeling now, in a couple of hours, a couple of days, it will probably shift. So that's really important to understand. Another thing that's important to know is that the way we think and the way we feel and the way we act affects how we feel.
Hmm.
This is so empowering, right? Because it's not like feelings hit us and, well, that's it. There's nothing we can do. We can absolutely do things. We can think about the situation in a different way that may be less upsetting for us, or we can do things that are going to help us to feel better. And the third thing that's really important for kids to understand is that we can have more than one emotion at the same time.
Oh, that one's important,
Isn't it?
right?
Yes, and this is something that's not always obvious, but we talk about opposite feelings. Now,
Hmm.
opposite feelings are, say we're feeling anxious, we can dig within ourselves and find feelings of excitement.
Hmm.
And the opposite feelings aren't going to erase the first feeling,
Hmm.
but they can balance them and temper them and make it easier to approach something if we're anxious. Or say we're feeling angry, we can dig for feelings of compassion and
Hmm.
acceptance, and that can just soften the anger. So this idea of opposite feelings is really powerful.
So we're talking about emotion regulation, right?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
And
So we
that's,
really want
yeah.
to help kids to understand and cope with and communicate about their feelings. So it's not just get rid of them. Feelings are not things to be gotten rid of, right? They're a source of
Mm.
information about ourselves and what's going on around us. So the more we can understand them, that's powerful.
Well, how
But
many
we also
times do we as therapists talk to adults who are like, "Oh, I grew up in a home where I wasn't allowed to show my feelings. I wasn't allowed to talk about this or that. I was just told to be quiet, you know. A child's better
right.
seen than not heard, you know, that kind of
Yes.
thing." Yeah. And that's damaging, right? That's kind of what I'm hearing. Oh, she'll come back in just a second.
One thing that kids
There you
need to understand is that there's
go.
a
Hmm.
difference between being passive, being aggressive, and being assertive. So being passive is we kind of squelch our own feelings and wishes. And that's not respectful to ourselves. Being aggressive, of course, is not being respectful to other people. Being
Hmm.
assertive is when we can speak up in a way that is respectful of both ourselves and others. And that's what we're aiming for. So we might use I statements, we might be willing to compromise, but that middle ground is what we're aiming for.
That's wonderful. Assertive communication, you know, that is a serious life skill. And we all
Absolutely.
struggle with that. And I know that in my work, especially with adults, the challenge becomes not overcompensating,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So if one is used to being passive or being quiet or containing everything, then we need to be careful that we don't overshoot, right? When we're trying to be more assertive, that we end up kind of letting it all out or being more aggressive or too harsh, right?
Right. And it
Yeah.
takes practice.
Hmm.
So I think that that's something that's really important to understand is that one of my favorite lines is that love means trying again. And I think that this is such a powerful thing for us because none of us is going to be perfect. We're
Hmm.
all going to bungle and make mistakes and say things we shouldn't have said and not say things we should have said. But love means trying again. So we keep going.
So let's sit with that for a minute. So loving ourselves, loving others, right, means that we don't just, if, oh, I tried to resolve that, so it's on them now. They didn't forgive me or they didn't hear me. And
Yeah.
so I'm not gonna bother with them anymore. Right? Love means having, you know, second, third, fourth chances to have a conversation, to be understood.
Right.
Right?
And I like that you said both forgiving ourselves and forgiving others. I had a client once who his mom and I and he were trying to figure out who he could play with. And the mom said, "Oh, how about the kid down the road?" And he said, "Nuh-uh, because 2 years ago in travel basketball, he never passed the ball." So we don't
Right.
want to be collecting grievances like beads on a string, right?
Mm-hmm.
That weighs us down as well as being unkind and ungenerous. And I'm
Yeah.
sure the kid didn't remember whatever happened 2 years ago.
Right. I've heard the term wound collector. Right.
Exactly, exactly. So
Yeah.
Chris and I have a list of what we call forgiveness guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
So if it happened once and it's not likely to happen again, let it go. If the person is genuinely sorry for whatever it is, let it
Mm.
go. If it happened more than a month ago, definitely let it go. We don't want to be burdened by that.
So boundaries, right?
Boundaries, yes.
Boundaries as far as it's not so black and white, right? It's not, oh, you wronged me, so you can never be my friend again, right? But kind of like
Forgiveness
fool me
too.
once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame, or fool me, once, shame on, or you, right? Fool me twice, shame on me. That's how it goes, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of those adult concepts. But I'm wondering, these are all wonderful touch points, talking about the myths around emotion regulation for children, the challenges, obviously the ideal. But how does this work actually play out when you're working with children? How do parents instill these values in their kids, right? Because it's a challenging thing because stuff
It
comes up every day
absolutely
and you
is.
don't always find out about it right away, and we look for teachable moments as parents. But how do we do the work?
We always want to start with empathy. You can never go wrong by reaching first for empathy. And you can say something to your child, like, well, the formula that I teach clients in my practice is you're feeling blank because blank.
Hmm.
And if you have a prickly kid, you can say it sounds like or it seems like, but sometimes you can just spell it out and says, you're feeling frustrated because he did that to you, or you're feeling hurt because she said that thing about you. And just this is kind of a dippy intervention, but some of us have made a career out of it
Oh, for
because
sure.
it works. It just feels good to be heard. And
Mm-hmm.
there's something really magical about wrapping feelings up in words because it makes them more understandable and therefore more manageable. And when we're able to do that for our children, it's like we're holding half the weight of their big feelings. So reflect, 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 reflect. Now, notice that the phrases about reflecting, you're feeling blank because blank, it's hard for you when, it bothers you when, you wish, all of these have the word you in it, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't have the word I. As
Mm-hmm.
soon as we introduce I, we make it more about, I understand you're feeling like that's not what we're focusing on. We're focusing on the child's feelings. So stick with you. Another thing that's important is you may have to do several of these statements. And what
Mm-hmm.
we're looking for is the softening in your child's face or in their body. And they're not going to say, "Why, yes, Father, what an insightful observation." But you'll see, you'll see that softening, or you might get a grunt of acknowledgement. You got it, you got it. And that means your child feels heard. And
Mm-hmm.
then and only then we can move on to problem solving. So here I recommend asking before telling. So you might say, what do you think might help?
Mm-hmm.
Or what do you think you're going to do? Or how do you think she'll respond if you try that? So, because we want to help them to think things through rather
Mm-hmm.
than just giving them the answer.
I like that. So you're guiding them gently. That sounds
Yeah,
very much like the therapeutic approach. And a lot of the validating is also confirmation, right? The reflecting.
exactly.
Because as parents, we may think we know what the child is trying to relate to us, but we don't necessarily want to make assumptions either, right?
Right. And if a kid is feeling hurt by whatever's happening out there
Mm-hmm.
with friends, they really need to come home to safety. So this is not the time to be critical, even though I know you're right.
Why
Didn't
did
I
you let
tell
that
you?
happen? I told you 100 times, you don't
Exactly,
do that on the
exactly.
playground, right? Yeah.
Right.
We don't want
So
to start with that
empathy
kind of talk,
first.
right?
Right. Empathy first. And
Empathy
then
first.
then try to pull it out of them. Whatever words come out of their lips are more valuable than what we tell them. So let's help them to think it through and to imagine the other kid's perspective. So why do you think he did that?
Mm-hmm.
Chris and I have a thing that we call the maybe game. Research tells us that kids and adults who are prone to anger tend to
Mm-hmm.
assume they did that out of deliberate meanness. Well, maybe, but probably not. I mean, true malice is rare, right? So if we can think of other possible maybes to explain it. So maybe they did it because they were trying to be mean, but maybe it was an accident. Maybe they didn't realize. Maybe they were trying to do this other thing. And if we can come up with some other reasons, some other maybes, it makes the deliberate meanness seem less likely. We call that the maybe game.
I love it. Maybe possibilities, right? And
Exactly.
that goes back to like being able to see things objectively,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And not just being in their immediate feeling about what that's very much tied to their assumptions, right? And same thing with adults,
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
right? We make assumptions that creates feelings, or feelings reinforce those assumptions, right? Then we make a judgment about the situation,
Right.
about how we feel. So we're teaching kids to think critically about circumstances, their feelings, making sure things are accurate, balanced, complete, congruent with the context, right? And then kind of proceed mindfully about how what they want to do about it.
That's in a
Yeah.
nutshell, yeah. In Growing Feelings, we talk about what we call feeling stories,
Mm-hmm.
and so an event happens, and then as soon as that happens, we are meaning-making creatures, so we start thinking about the implications of that
Mm-hmm.
event. Then those thoughts trigger feelings. Those feelings prime certain actions, and our actions trigger reactions from other people. Now, the beauty of the feeling story is that each one of those points is a point of intervention. We can start with the situation. If it's something that happens regularly, we might be able to change the situation so that it's less likely to
Uh-huh.
happen. Thoughts are the easiest one because we can do that in an instant to think about the situation differently. In terms of feelings, we can muster those opposite feelings. And in terms of actions, we always have a choice about how we're going to respond. It's not that those feelings immediately lead to actions. We've got some points in between there. We can make that choice. And then we can always anticipate how the other person is going to react.
Could you say a little bit more about what that might look like if we were role playing, or context, and eliciting like feeling stories? Right.
Okay. So in my practice, what I would go is, wow, it sounds like you had some big feelings there. Let's do a feeling story about that. Okay, so what started it? And now this is one that you have to kind of sometimes pick the right one.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Thompson, who's a writer, has a hilarious line that I wish I'd written. And it's his description of a conflict between kids. And it goes, it all started when she kicked me back. So sometimes we need to go a little farther back in there.
That's
Okay,
funny.
yeah. And before that, what happened before that? So you pick a good event. And then we start asking, so what did it mean to you that she did that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we probe maybe, are there some other possibilities? Is there some other reason why she might have done that? And we can get them to think about it a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes we can challenge like how much of an impact this is. I have something that I do called the badness scale. And we're going to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10.
Mm-hmm.
So not how much do you like it, but how much does it permanently change your life in a bad way? Because of course you don't like it, it's bad, but how much does it permanently change your life in a bad way? 1 is you have to cut your fingernails. I don't like cutting my fingernails, so that's bad, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then 10 is the worst thing I can imagine, which is everyone you love is dead. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
that is just devastating,
Sure,
right?
unimaginable, especially for a
Right.
child.
And then 5 is you have to move and leave all your friends. That would be very hard, but
Mm-hmm.
you'd manage it. You still have your family and you would make new friends. So on a scale of fingernails to death, how bad was this? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they go 7. And I say, really? It was almost as bad as losing everybody you know and worse than moving? I
Mm-hmm.
said, well, maybe 1.5. Uh-huh. Much closer to fingernails. And then we can kind of temper their reaction. With the feelings, we want to just acknowledge their feelings, and we might dig for some of those opposite feelings. And then we want to think very hard about what to do. And again, pull the options out from the kids if we can. What could you say that would help her understand? Or what could you say to or what who might be able to help with that situation? So that would be
Mm-hmm.
another way to go. Or what else could you do when she does that? And get them to think through options. And then we want to think about their likely reactions. So,
Mm-hmm.
and how has she responded in the past when you've done this? So what do you think she's going to do if you do that?
Right.
And we're just kind of slowing it down and letting them see that there are so many different options.
That's great. It really gives them a container, it sounds like, in context
Exactly.
in order to understand their own range of emotions and what's appropriate, not to invalidate emotions, but to help them get in touch with the context or the reaction to the situation, right? Whether
Yes.
they're making a mountain out of a molehill, right? Which
Right, and
everyone is capable of.
emotions we're all capable of that, and we have
Yeah.
to remember that emotions happen in an interpersonal context. You know, you're
Mm-hmm.
going to get reactions from other people, and sometimes kids are not so good at predicting those reactions. I can think of 2 examples. So, one is a kid is trying to be funny,
Mm-hmm.
and they say something and it is not funny. So they say it 8 more times hoping it will become funny, which it never does.
Right.
So that's not such a good strategy.
Their filter is not so great. Yeah.
Yeah. And then so sometimes kids have to learn to recognize what we call stop signals. And with some children, I will make a list of things with their help. Quit it, cut it out. You're being annoying. Like kids can
Mm-hmm.
be very direct, or sometimes it's nonverbal, or something like that. When you hear one of those or see one of those, you need to stop, because otherwise you're communicating to the other person, I don't care how you feel. And of course, we don't want to
Right.
do that. Now, with some kids, it's hard to stop. So we have to give them a replacement behavior. And it might be cross their arms or sit on their hands or pretend their tongue is stuck to the roof of their mouth. Or
Mm-hmm.
some kids need a little extra breaking room. So I'll teach them to say something like, I'm going to stop now. Well, that's enough of that, or something like that. And it just gives them those 2 seconds to kind of rein it in, but it communicates
Mm-hmm.
immediately. I hear you that you're not enjoying this. I'm going to stop. I had a girl
Oh.
in my practice once who came in and she said, I know how to make friends. I said, oh, great. What do you do? And she told me, I go over to the corner of the playground and I look very sad. And then everybody comes running towards me. Well, that might work once, but it's not a good strategy in general.
Right.
Yeah.
Then you're just fishing, right?
Right.
Negative
Exactly.
attention is still attention if they don't know how to get it or feel
Exactly.
validated otherwise.
Right. So kids
Right.
want to be around kids who are happy and having fun. So we have to think about ways that they can have fun with other kids.
Yeah. And so a lot of this sounds like, so the first part was emotion regulation, right? And then it was more chaining, which is more of a DBT term, but it's more like, okay, let's reverse engineer the situation for
Yes, yes.
context. And now we're talking about emotional intelligence,
Right.
right?
And it's
Or
kind of,
soft skills, which are not really, I don't know why they use the term soft skills because they're
yeah,
not easy.
right, right. Yeah. And it's kind of
Yeah.
a combination of a social and emotional
Hmm.
understanding. We have to be able to predict how other people are going to react. And that's so hard.
But these are strategies that anybody can learn. Any parent can learn to use to help. Just like we say that the therapist's goal is for the client to be their own therapist, right? To have
Absolutely.
that to adopt those skills, to have that
Yeah,
voice in their head that helps them talk themselves through these situations. Same thing as a parent, right? Our goal is for our children to become self-sufficient in these things and to be their
exactly.
own be their own parent, right?
And there's definitely kind of a virtuous cycle that happens, that
Hmm.
as kids start to be more successful socially, and I mean that not in terms of becoming the most popular or whatever, but in terms of creating genuine and satisfying relationships, it keeps going and it gets easier. But
Yeah.
sometimes that initial part is hard. So, and sometimes what we parents and what we adults think is the way to go is not. For instance, we adults tend to tell kids, go over there and introduce yourself to those kids and ask if you can play. Don't.
Yeah.
So there have been studies where they video record kids on playgrounds. I don't know how they got permission to do
I
this,
was gonna
but they
say, yeah,
did.
super
And
challenging.
what they found is that there's a very specific sequence for how kids join a group, and that's watch, then blend. So watch what the other kids are doing and then slide into the action without interrupting.
Hmm.
So if the other kids are lining up to play foursquare, you need to watch to figure out where the end of the line is and which square is which, and then you go do that. If all the kids are building something, you can approach with a compliment or bring over more stuff for them to build with, and then you can join the activity. If there's a game going on, a sports game, you want to watch to see which team is losing, because they're going to be more open to you joining their game. The same sequence applies for older kids, where it's more about conversation rather than playing a game. And in this case, what we would do is match the emotional tone of the group. So if everybody is complaining about the social studies test and our kid comes in and says, well, I thought it was easy. Oof, that's like, there's a melody going on, la, 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 and our kid goes, there's a sour note, right?
Right.
So she shouldn't pretend that she's stupid, right? Deceit is not a path towards friendship. But she could say, yeah, I can't believe there were 4 short answers, or I can't believe we had the social studies test on the same day that we had the math test.
Be relatable.
Right? Exactly. Match the emotional tone of the group. Or if everybody's talking about the latest collectible and our kid comes over and says, well, these are stupid. I mean, they're just cardboard with pictures on them. He's may as well have a neon sign above his head saying, I don't belong here. So he either has to ask an interested question, beginning with how or what, or give a compliment. Or he needs to find a group where they all hate the collectible, and then he's fine.
Isn't that the truth? That's really powerful stuff. Talk about an ideal clients, with social anxiety, which are a lot of these, adults who used to be these children who didn't learn these skills, can lead to things like social anxiety. And so we're trying to reteach them. And I use the term reading the room, like you're talking about, observing, right? Observing the context, how people are behaving. And I like the way you say, like, slide in without interrupting.
Exactly.
I love that. I love that imagery, because it is very much, you're not trying to disrupt the flow, and you're not necessarily trying to, you don't want to become too polarized either, like you were saying in that situation with like the test. You don't want to be the one who looks like a teacher's pet, or entitled, or the complainer, or whatever it is, a complete opposite, right? You want to find ways to be relatable.
Yeah. So friendship is fundamentally a relationship between equals. And what I do with kids is I'll draw a Venn diagram of 2 overlapping circles. And that area in the middle, that overlap, is our common ground. That's where friendships begin. So you want to think about, what do you like doing that you could do with other people? If you are talking about something that is true only of you and not the other kid, that's irrelevant to starting a friendship. I see this a lot with really bright kids. They've learned from adults that they say, oh, I can do this and I can do that. And the adults are charmed and say, oh, isn't that wonderful? So then they try the same script with kids, and their peers are not charmed. And they say, who cares? Or quit bragging. So really finding that common ground is what we want to do.
That's tricky, because some kids, that could be an attempt to be confident. They're leading with their strengths, which oftentimes they're told to do, right? Lead with your strengths. But then, yeah, that can create a lot of flack for them, because it'll, if the other kids label them as being, a bragger,
Yeah, and they're not. It's really kind of a clumsy effort to connect. And not understanding that the scripts are different for connecting with adults than they are for kids. So I think what we want to do is help the other person to feel good when they're with you, and figure out what you have in common, especially what do you both like to do.
Right. Back to the fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And I'm wondering, you're talking about all these wonderful skills, right, that parents can learn to help their children become more emotionally adept, more socially intelligent, right? What are some of the pitfalls you see parents make when it comes to bad advice, or maybe approaches a lot of parents will commonly take with their kids that end up causing more problems for the children?
Well, I think it parents often don't understand that children's relationships change a lot. And sometimes they take it up to the next level, and now the parents are battling, and that is just
Mm,
not a good idea. It makes it so much harder on the kids. So, as tempting as it is to think that your little angel is being hurt by that terrible bully, be careful, because that other kid is a child also.
mhm.
And so many times as parents, we're like staying up late worrying about the big thing that happened with our daughter and all her friends. And then the next day she comes home from school and we say, "How was it?" And she's like, "Oh, it was fine." It's like, "Oh, then why did you put me through that?"
Yeah, right? Thank you for that validation. I thought I was the only one.
Yeah.
It's like,
Or,
put our
one
capes
day,
on, go save the day, and then after you've like kicked up a bunch of dust with other parents or school teachers, whatever, then it's kind of like, oh, that, the kid had already had it resolved, or it's like yesterday's news and they're over
exactly.
it.
Yeah. We adults tend to want kids to talk everything out. But research tells us that negotiation and compromise doesn't become the main way that kids handle disagreements until about age 19. So,
Prefrontal cortex, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
so that doesn't mean we don't help them, guide them sometimes, but often the way kids resolve things is they just separate for a little bit and then they come back together and just be kind to each other. I had a
Yeah.
kid in my practice once, a little kindergartner, and he came in so sad. And I said, "What happened?" And he told me, "I lost my best friend."
Hmm.
And it turns out they'd had an argument about something. I don't even remember what it was. Um, and then I said to him, "I don't think you've lost your friend. Here's what I want you to do tomorrow. Go in, and when you see your friend at school, give him a big smile and then just have fun with him." And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Really?" And it worked out.
Oh,
So the
right.
next day they were back together.
That's
So
excellent. Right.
I think this
Reconnect.
is a perfect example of love means trying
Wow.
again.
I love
Yeah.
that. I love that. There's so many great examples you've given us, so many wonderful nuggets of wisdom in parenting and helping our children thrive. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr.
Sure.
Kennedy. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I could tell your listeners about one other thing, which I'm just having
Please.
so
Yes.
much
Please.
fun with, I have a podcast for children called
Mm-hmm.
Kids Ask Dr. Friendtastic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's free, it's 5 minutes, and each episode has an audio recording of a question about friendship from a child. So they say a first name, doesn't even have to be their first name,
Mm-hmm.
their age, and then a brief question about friendship. And then there is a practical and thought provoking answer. And it all happens in just 5 minutes. But this is absolutely my favorite work activity because the kids' questions are just adorable and so profound to see these. They're just wonderful. So if you have kids who are 13 or under and they'd like to have a question answered, I would love to answer it. Send it on in.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, wow, such a great service to offer, the community and our children and to help them thrive, to have a Q&A. That's really, really powerful, especially for children to hear from the mouths of other children, you know,
Right. And it
kind of
lets
that.
them feel less
Yeah,
alone,
right.
and like their questions matter. So I really enjoy that. And then the books for kids are Growing Friendships, A Kid's
Mm-hmm.
Guide to Making and Keeping Friends, and Growing Feelings, A Kid's Guide to Dealing with Emotions About Friends and Other Kids.
Hmm.
And I also have a whole bunch of books for parents as well.
I see. Wow, what a plethora of resources. So thank you for that. And if anyone's watching this on the YouTube channel, you can definitely see I'm showing off her website here, which is very user friendly. You've got a lot going on. I know you've done a lot of speaking gigs. You've got a lot of books out. The podcast is particularly fascinating to me. It's a great, great service. And then as far as your socials, those are all here at the bottom of your site for anybody who wants to check out your Instagram. Got that right here, right? And anybody who wants to check out your LinkedIn, so you're pretty easy to find all over. Right? So I'll make sure I link all of this up in the show notes as well for anybody who wants to check out the wonderful work you are doing. And be sure to grab a copy of your new book, Growing Feelings. And that way we can keep equipping our children to live their best lives, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Patrick. I really
Ah,
appreciate it.
my pleasure, Doctor. Thank you. You're always welcome on to share as you like. Cannot get enough of this kind of this knowledge, this wisdom in order to help our children thrive. So thank you.
Thank you.
You enjoy your week.